Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with week 45 of World War II, July 6th, 1940. Do the Brits hate the French? Yes. The bombing of Mers-el-Kebir. Before we dive in, let me just explain. If you can't already tell by the sound of my voice, I am dying. I am sick, so hopefully I am still capable of talking when there are points to talk about, but hopefully I'm not too quiet or anything because I'm not, I'm trying to preserve my voice. Um Hopefully quality isn't too much of a step down from the norm, which I mean isn't that high quality to start with, but it's something. Anyways, that acknowledgement done. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, well, if you look at the last 500 years or so, they haven't really gotten along most of the time anyhow. All right.
That's what I'm saying.
July 6, 1940. Britain and France have been allies, fighting the Germans together in France, Belgium, and even Norway. But this week, one of them attacks the other.
Wait, what? Oh, is this the British attacking Vichy France?
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, as the Franco-German armistice goes into effect, the final Allied evacuations from France were finished. France and Italy also signed an armistice, the Soviet Union occupied parts of Romania, and Britain realized that a German attack was a near-future possibility. Well, one such attack happens already this week. On June 30th, Germany invades the Channel Islands. 2 days later, Britain closes Brighton Beach to the public. It is mined, and defensive works like barbed wire are installed. But the war may really be coming to the main British island. On the 2nd, Hitler orders all forces to prepare for an invasion of Britain. He does not set a date. He does think that a landing invasion is possible if they have air superiority. They cannot take that for granted, though. Munitions for Britain are arriving from the U.S. in increasing numbers by now. For example, on July 3rd, the Britannic leaves New York with 50,000 rifles and 10 million rounds of ammunition.
Damn.
And on the 6th, after reading Enigma messages from the Luftwaffe, the British discover that the German bomber strength is not what they thought it was. They had thought the Germans could launch 2,500 bombers against them. The reality is just half that. They also thought the Germans could drop 4,800 tons of bombs a day. The reality is just a third of that.
Oof.
However, the Germans do begin their daylight bombing raids of the island the 4th, dropping high explosive bombs at Aldershot. This comes a few days after Cardiff, Wales, one of the world's biggest coal ports, is bombed for the first time. I have a few things that affect civilians this week. Here are a couple of notes, courtesy of Martin Gilbert. On June 30th, Adolf Hitler issues instructions for the German military in France to take into custody all art that is state-owned or in Jewish hands. This was not, Hitler explained, an expropriation, but a transfer to our safekeeping as a security for eventual peace negotiations. Not only were the museums ransacked, but also the main Jewish private collections and the stock of the principal Jewish art dealers. Also this week, Heinrich Himmler, chief of the SS, tells Hitler of his plan for settling the areas of Poland that Germany had annexed. Soldiers and SS men, who respectively served 2 and 4 years, will be sent to the annexed land to work it for 8 years, then marry and take over an estate or a farm. As for the people currently living there, the 1/8 of them that are deemed racially acceptable will be moved to Germany as labor, and 7/8 sent to the general government region. Poles from this region, though, will provide the labor force for those army and SS men to work the land in the annexed region. Poles who have sexual relations with their masters will receive either the death sentence or a long prison term. A whole government is moving this week, actually. French Prime Minister Philippe Pétain moves his cabinet to Vichy from Bordeaux. Now, one of his ministers is Admiral François Darlan, recently head of the Navy under Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, and one of those who've been most determined not to let the French fleet fall into German hands. But now, as Marine Minister in the government that has signed the armistice, he is equally determined to not break that armistice by sailing the fleet into neutral or British waters. The British government are, as I've said, really worried that the fleet will be used by the Germans as part of an invasion fleet of Britain. So they execute Operation Catapult July 3rd.
I was right. The British do attack the Vichy French.
This operation is to neutralize all French warships wherever they are, to keep them away from the Germans by any means necessary. British and French commanders negotiate at Alexandria as the French fleet is blockaded in the harbor, but it's a different story at the former Barbary pirate base at Mers-el-Kebir. There, the British give the French 4 options to choose from: to sail to a British port and hand over the ships, to sail to a British port and then fight alongside Britain against Germany, to demilitarize the ships, to wreck or scuttle them to the point that they'd be no use to the Germans. Well, the French say no, so the British give them option 5. Sail them to the French West Indies, where they can be disarmed or placed in American custody until after the war. The French say no.
Nope.
It turns out that there is an option 6. The British bombarding the French Navy, and this is what happens. The French Admiral Marcel Gensoul has insisted that he would never let his ships fall into German hands. British Admiral Sir James Somerville, who is, quote, charged with one of the most disagreeable and difficult tasks that a British admiral has ever been faced with, a quote in Churchill's words, is very much against the use of force against a recently allied navy, and has had magnetic mines dropped across the harbor entrance, but still unable to resolve the standoff. At 5:54 p.m., HMS Hood, Valiant, and Resolution open fire on the French. The Bretagne is sunk. The Dunkirk and Provence are badly damaged. Provence will sink in the harbor, but both it and Dunkirk will eventually be refloated. The battleship Strasbourg and a couple destroyers, however, under cover of all the smoke, managed to escape to the open sea and reach Toulon. When Somerville is told of their escape, he doesn't believe it at first because of the magnetic mines, but escape they do. The Dunkirk and the Strasbourg are what the British are most concerned here with, since they're pretty modern and have been built specifically to counter Germany's Deutschland-class cruisers and can even handle the Scharnhorst-class pocket battleship's guns. The Royal Navy quite rightly regarded Operation Catapult as the most shameful task it had ever been called upon to perform.
We sure about that? British have done quite a few things that are they're pretty shameful. Something tells me that maybe this may not be the worst thing the Royal Navy has ever done.
And yet, this one-sided battle had an extraordinary effect around the world in its demonstration that Britain was prepared to fight on as ruthlessly as it needed. Roosevelt in particular was convinced the British would now not surrender. And in the House of Commons, Churchill was cheered for similar reasons, and not because of any hatred of the French for seeking armistice.
There was no hatred in this action, nor none of the excitement of battle. These ships had been our allies against the enemies of both our countries. The Navy put them out of action to save them from being used in the vile cause which aimed at the complete enslavement of France. Thus, the Battle of Oran.
1,297 Frenchmen are killed, men who had been Britain's allies 2 weeks ago. French ships currently in British ports are boarded and taken by the British as well. 2 battleships, 9 destroyers, and many smaller ships. You may imagine this causes a pretty big stir in France, and you're right. On the 5th, the Vichy government breaks off diplomatic relations with Britain. They have other diplomatic headaches too. The Japanese have asked them for military bases in French Indochina to use in their war on the Chinese, and they're now negotiating this. The American reaction to that is to pass on the 5th the Export Control Act, under which there is a ban on exporting chemicals or minerals or aircraft parts to Japan without a license. See, the European situation now might have serious consequences for the Pacific. France and the Netherlands have been defeated by Germany, but they have big colonial holdings in the Far East, which have no real defense now, and which Japan certainly has its eye on. The British are still active, and of course, they have their massive navy. But they're at war with Germany and Italy. So can they take on a third enemy half the world away, which is a possibility because Britain controls Burma, and the Burma Road is the main overland route for arms supplies to China, and Japan is demanding that Britain close the road. At the end of the week, on the 6th, the British ambassador to Japan gets orders to refuse the demand, since that would be discriminating against China. He says if they do not close the road, then there is the real possibility that the Japanese will attack them and they will have a third enemy to be at war with. And what would that mean for Hong Kong or Singapore? Those are under British control, or British Malaya in general, a major source of rubber and tin. British agree to close the road.
Oh.
The British take a PR hit anyhow this week, as German news releases excerpts from documents captured in France relating to Operation Pike, the plan to bomb the Soviet oil fields that I talked about a couple months ago. Britain is not at war with the Soviet Union. Romania had just avoided war with the Soviets by ceding a whole bunch of lands, which does not sit well with the Romanians. So they get a new cabinet, the 5th, under new Prime Minister Ion Gigertu, a former foreign minister. He is a Germanophile and a friend of Hermann Goering.
Of course.
Romania is pretty much isolated since its alliance with Britain and France couldn't help against Soviet demands and is turning to Germany for aid and protection. The cabinet is meant, in fact, to appease the Axis powers. Foreign Minister Mihail Manuilescu is well thought of in both Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, and Horia Sima, Minister of Religion and Arts, is a member of the Iron Guard, a powerful paramilitary fascist organization. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 1st, the Italian Air Force starts bombing Palestine. On the 4th, the Italians occupy Kassala in Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. And this week on the 2nd, the Arandora Star is torpedoed off the Irish coast. Over 700 people died, mostly Italian or German nationals about to be interned in Canada. It is sunk by Gunther Prien, who we've seen before when he sunk the Royal Oak last year. And that is the week. With the Germans taking artwork, the Romanians getting a new government, the Japanese making demands, and all of it overshadowed by the British Navy attacking the French. Adolf Hitler returns to Berlin this week for the first time since the attacks in the West began May the 10th. He is met by enormous cheering crowds. All of the enemies he's invaded have surrendered, and Britain stands alone and doesn't look too tough to him either. And they've just attacked the French, who were their main ally 2 weeks ago. I am reminded of the summer of 1918, when German and Ottoman troops fought each other in the Caucasus, at a time when those empires were staunch allies at war against common enemies. But it seems that the normal rules of engagement fly out the window in modern war.
Nice.
Speaking of rules of engagement and the treatment of civilians, if you want to know more about how...
Okay. And that was week 45 of World War II, July 6th, 1940. The Brits hate the French. Bombing of Mers-el-Kebir. There really wasn't anything in this episode I feel like to talk more about. I mean, I guess really the Anglo-French relations, of course, were a little bit of something, but I don't think it was necessary. I don't know. It's not some exciting week, but nothing really to expand upon, I feel like. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.